Now, when it comes to the Wren, there's some things that I like to pass along to our Wren owners out there. It's been a long time since I've worked on them, but these issues kind of stuck with me. First thing is, if you do an engine upgrade with the Wren, you want to make sure you don't add a lot of weight forward of the firewall, especially with a 3-blade prop, because the Wren, while it came in flat, also tended to land in a flat attitude, and any extra weight forward of the firewall is going to exacerbate that. So you got to be careful with that. In terms of the engine and the canard, all the previous videos I've made relative to those two modifications we do apply to the Wren equally well. Now, as far as the Wren itself goes, probably the biggest issues I've seen so far is that the massive flap system that a Wren has means there's a whole bunch of pivot points in every hanger out there where everything pivots around. And most of the time I see mechanics really snug those bolts and nuts down on those pivot points, and what that does is it induces a huge amount of drag in the system. So on all those pivot points on a Wren, what I would do is I would snug them up and then back off the nut a half a turn. And by doing that, it makes things a lot freer, makes the flaps work better, smoother, and for long-term maintenance, a much better deal. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing is, if you've got a wing heavy condition in flight, you can adjust the wings the same as the stock 182 with the eccentrics at the rear wing attach points. But there's also some other things with the Wren that cause issues like this. One is, if you get a long straight edge, I'd hold a long straight edge up along the bottom of the wing, inboard towards the cabin, and that straight edge would extend back to the trailing edge of the flap on either side of the Wren. And what you want to do is, when you put that straight edge up there and extend it back, you want to make sure that each flap, inboard flap, is the same distance out of the slipstream. Because what happens is, I've seen some Wrens where if this is a slipstream, we've got one flap here, we've got another flap here. Well, obviously what happens is, when you extend the flaps, the lowest one hits the slipstream first before the other one gets there, and that induces a rolling tendency, and then the other one starts down. So if you're getting a rolling tendency, one of the things you want to do is check where the flaps are relative to the slipstream. Number two is if you get a rolling tendency when the flaps come down, sometimes that's because the entire right side flaps come down before the left. And what I'll do there is, I'll have somebody in the cockpit, turn the master on, I'll put my fingers up where the joint is at the inboard edge of the flap and the fairing on the fuselage, so I can feel flap movement immediately. And then I'll watch the flap on the right side, and I'll have them extend the flaps. And a lot of times what I'll see is the flaps on the right side start coming down a bit before the left side starts, and it trails. Well, what happens there, obviously, is if the right side starts down a little early, that'll induce a roll to the left. And of course, the right side comes down immediately because it's hooked to the motor and transmission, and that motion is carried through carry-through cables, like all 182s, to the left side that actuates those. So if there's an issue in the flaps coming down at the same time, check the carry-through cables, make sure tensions are good, but the flaps should both deploy at the same time. Now, one of the things we saw in the past that was a really big issue, safety-wise, and only saw it once, but I'm going to mention it, is a long time ago, we had a Wren come to us that when it stalled, when the guy did stalls with it, the airplane literally pitched straight nose down. It just quit flying. And when we looked at it, what we found is the flap motor and transmission had been replaced in the airplane. Now, the stock Cessna transmission goes to 40 degrees. Nobody had repinned it because the max travel on a Wren goes to 30 degrees. So these flaps, this massive flap system, was still coming down a full 40 degrees. And what would happen is, not only did it strain everything in the flap system tremendously, but as the flaps came down to 40 degrees in a stall, that amount of flap totally blanked out the airflow over the tail, and it just pitched straight nose down. Once we repinned the transmission to 30 degrees, problem went away. So if you ever replace a transmission on a Wren, make sure they repin that so you've got a maximum of 30 degrees extension. And I found 30 degrees is right at the edge of what's acceptable. And if you're gonna repin the transmission and make an error in either direction, make an error with a little less flap. I'd rather have a flap maximum extend to 28 degrees than I would 32 degrees. 30 is the actual limit. So, you've got to do that. Other things are, of course, parts have not been available for a long, long time with Wrens, 40 years or more. But most of the parts on there are capable of being reproduced in the fields. That's just what you're going to have to do. When it comes to rigging, we've had a few Wrens that have gone to shops around the country to be re-rigged. And my only suggestion there is if the airplane's flying good, no matter kind of how it looks, I wouldn't mess with it, because rigging on a Wren is extremely complicated. And you make a small adjustment out at the tip of the right wing, and the left wing's now all messed up. And I mean, you chase stuff around for a long, long time. So the moral there is, if the Wren's flying pretty good, I wouldn't mess with the rigging. And really, that's pretty much the extent of it. I would say if you've got any questions at all, give me a call. I'm always happy to help you guys with the Wrens. It's a great airplane. Need anything, let me know. Take care.